The doorbell rang at 5:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving, and I almost didn't answer it. I wish I could tell you that what came next was comfortable or clean or the kind of thing that resolves itself by dessert. It didn't. It unraveled something my family had kept sealed for 22 years, and the man standing on my porch had no idea he was about to pull the thread. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 38 years old. I'm a licensed structural engineer based in Columbus, Ohio, and on November 23, 2023, I was standing in my kitchen on Birchfield Lane in the Clintonville neighborhood, finishing the gravy when the doorbell rang. My wife, Sandra, 36, was in the dining room arranging the table, the good plates, the cloth napkins, the whole production she runs every Thanksgiving with the organizational precision of a military operation. Our two kids, Owen, 9, and Maya, 6, were somewhere upstairs making the specific kind of noise that means they are absolutely not doing what they were told to do before dinner. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered the door. The man on the porch was tall, but folded into himself the way people get when they've been carrying something heavy for too long. He wore a canvas jacket that had been waterproofed once and wasn't anymore. His jeans were worn through at the knees. His boots had separated at one toe. His beard was long, gray, and untrimmed. His eyes were clear, alert, the eyes of someone who was still entirely present, even when everything else suggested the world had stopped seeing him. He stepped back slightly when I opened the door, gave me space, didn't lean in, didn't crowd the threshold. "I'm sorry to bother you on Thanksgiving." His voice was steady, quiet. "Do you have any spare food you could give me? I haven't eaten since yesterday, on Thanksgiving Eve." I looked at him for a moment. He held my gaze without aggression, without entitlement, just steady, patient, waiting to be told no and prepared to accept it. "Hold on. Give me just a second." I went back inside. Sandra was in the doorway between the dining room and the hall, arms crossed, having heard the exchange. Sandra's voice came quiet and certain, the tone of someone delivering the only rational solution to a simple problem. "Give him some money and close the door. We've got the kids here and dinner's almost ready." I looked at her, then back at the door. Then I made a decision that I did not fully understand at the time. Said another place. "He's eating with us." Sandra stared at me. "Nathan, he hasn't eaten since yesterday. It's Thanksgiving, we don't know him." "Sandra." I kept my voice level. He stepped back when I opened the door. He apologized 3 times in one sentence. He asked for food, not money. Whatever he is, he's not a threat. I picked up my dish towel, set the plate. "Please." She was furious. I could see it in the set of her jaw, the precise way she turned and went back to the dining room. Embarrassed, too, the way we get embarrassed when something disrupts the version of our life we've carefully arranged for display. I didn't know it yet. But her embarrassment was nothing compared to what was coming for me. I went back to the front door. "Sir, I'd like you to come in and have dinner with us. You're not bothering anyone. There's more than enough." The man looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly. More like the careful assessment of someone who had learned not to trust good things until they proved themselves. A long pause. Then, "Thank you. I appreciate that more than you know." He stepped inside. I showed him to the downstairs bathroom, gave him a clean shirt from the laundry room, one of mine, slightly big on him, and told him to take his time. While he was in there, Sandra appeared at my shoulder. "I want it on the record that I think this is a mistake." Noted. "Nathan." "Sandra." I turned to face her. "If I'm wrong, we had an uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner. That's the worst case. Let's eat." She looked at me the way she looks at me when she's decided I'm being unreasonable, but the argument is already over. Then she went and got a 5th plate. His name was Frank Derry. He came to the table clean-faced, wearing my shirt, and sat at the end near Owen, who watched him with the wide-open curiosity of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned to disguise interest as indifference. Maya asked him if he wanted more turkey before he'd even had any, which made him smile for the first time since he'd walked in. Frank was 64 years old, I found that out later, but he looked every year of it, and a few more besides. He ate carefully, took small portions, thanked Sandra twice for the food before he'd taken a single bite, which softened something in her face even though she was still working to keep it composed. We went around the table with what we were grateful for. Owen. Football. Maya, the dog, which we do not have, which is a recurring negotiation in our household. Sandra. Health and family, in the practiced tone of someone completing a required item. Me. Open doors, which I meant more than it sounded. Frank was quiet when it came to him. He looked at his plate for a moment. Then, I'm grateful to be seen. That's enough for today. The table was quiet for a moment. I asked him where he was from. Ohio, Columbus. Most of his adult life. Grew up in Dayton. Moved to Columbus in his mid-20s for work. What kind of work? He looked at his plate for a beat before answering. Construction development. Commercial properties mostly. I was a partner in a development company for about 12 years. Partner, development company. Columbus, something shifted in the back of my mind. Barely a flicker. I didn't know why yet. What was the company? I kept my voice conversational. He picked up his fork, set it back down, looked across the table at me with those clear, steady eyes. Cole Dairy Partners. The room didn't change. The kids kept eating. Sandra reached for the cranberry sauce. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 1 second earlier, but the blood drained from my face so fast I felt it leave. Cole Dairy. My father's name. My name. And his. Frank Dairy watched me go white and said nothing. He just waited. The same patient, careful waiting he'd done on my porch to see what I was going to do with what I now knew. I excused myself from the table on the pretext of checking something on the stove. There was nothing on the stove. I stood at the kitchen counter with both hands flat on the surface and stared at the backsplash tile and did the math I hadn't been able to do at the table. Cole Dairy Partners. I was 16 years old in 2001 when my father, Gerald Cole, came home one evening and told my mother that his business partner had been skimming accounts and that the company was finished. The controlled anger of a man who had been wronged in a way that couldn't be easily explained to a teenager. My mother put her hand on his arm and murmured, "I'm so sorry, Jerry," and that was essentially the entire conversation I had ever been allowed to have about it. I was told the partner's dishonesty had cost my father everything they had built together. I was told the partner's name once, in passing, and was never expected to remember it. I had not remembered it until Frank Dairy said it at my Thanksgiving table, 22 years later, while eating turkey with a plastic fork because Sandra had put out the nice silverware and I hadn't told her to. I didn't know what he was going to tell me, but I knew, standing at that counter, that I was about to find out something my father had never intended me to find. I went back to the table. After dinner, after Owen and Maya were settled upstairs with a movie, Frank and I sat at the kitchen table with coffee. Sandra sat with us. She had moved from furious to watchful sometime around the sweet potato dish, and by dessert, she was simply paying close attention, which is the thing she does when she's recalibrating. Frank, I set my mug down. Tell me what happened to Cole Dairy. He looked at me. You know who I am now. I figured it out when you said the name. Gerald Cole is my father. Frank absorbed that. His jaw moved once. Then he let out a long, slow breath. The breath of a man setting down something he's been carrying at chest height for a very long time. I didn't know this was your house. Frank's voice was level. I walked 12 blocks today. This was the third door I knocked on. I believe you. I did. Tell me what happened. So he told me. Cole Dairy Partners was incorporated in Columbus, Ohio in 1995. Frank Dairy, then 36, and Gerald Cole, then 45, had met through a commercial real estate networking group and discovered a complementary skill set. Frank was operations. Gerald was sales and client relationships. They built the company together over 7 years. By 2002, they had completed 11 commercial development projects in the Columbus metro area and had a 12th under contract. A mixed-use building on North High Street in the Short North neighborhood, their largest project to date. In March 2002, Gerald came to Frank with documentation showing that $340,000 had been moved from the company's operating account to a personal account in Frank's name. Frank had not moved that money. He had not authorized any such transfer. The account, he would later learn, had been opened in his name with a forged signature, a fact he could not prove fast enough to matter, because Gerald had already filed a complaint with the Columbus Police Department and had spoken to their investors and their contractor network before Frank knew the accusation was coming. Frank was 43 years old. He had a house in Worthington, a wife named Carol, and a daughter in middle school. By the end of 2002, he had lost the company, his professional reputation, their construction contractor relationships, and Carol, who filed for divorce in January 2003, 18 months after the accusation, having watched Frank spend everything they had trying to fight a story that Gerald had spent months embedding in the industry before Frank even knew it existed. He spent 2 years in litigation that went nowhere. No criminal charges were filed against him, because the evidence was insufficient, not because he was cleared. He was 46 when he stopped fighting. He found work in property maintenance, then facilities management, then odd labor jobs as his industry connections dried up and his resume became a liability instead of an asset. He lost the Worthington house in 2007 during the financial crisis. He had been functionally homeless, on and off, for the last 5 years. He had never spoken publicly about Gerald Cole. He had no proof. He had nothing but the knowledge of what had actually happened, carried in silence for 22 years because no one had ever asked him directly, and he had never expected anyone to. I sat at my kitchen table and listened to all of it. Sandra sat across from me and listened too. Neither of us spoke until he was finished. Then Sandra said quietly, "Do you have any documentation from that time?" Frank looked at her. "Some, not much. I kept what I could, the original partnership agreement, some emails, a bank statement from before the supposed transfers that shows my account balance. Not enough to have won anything then. Can I ask you something?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "The account that was opened in your name. Did you ever get the signature on the application?" "Once, through discovery in the civil case. The bank wouldn't give it to me directly." He paused. It looked like my handwriting. Enough to confuse anyone who wasn't looking carefully. But the pen pressure was wrong. The loop structure was wrong. I'm left-handed. Whoever signed it was right-handed. He looked at his coffee cup. My attorney at the time said it wasn't enough. The judge agreed. I thought about my father's handwriting. My father was right-handed. Frank slept in our guest room that Thanksgiving night, and the next morning I drove to a self-storage facility on Morse Road, where I kept my father's old business files. I need to explain why I had them. Gerald Cole, 67, had retired in 2019 and moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. When he sold his Columbus house, he asked me, as the only child of his first marriage, to clear out the home office, mostly junk and old paper, he called it. I had rented a storage unit and moved 12 boxes without reviewing the contents because I was busy and because I had no reason at the time to care what was in them. I had never opened those boxes. Not once in 4 years. I opened them the Friday after Thanksgiving, 2023. It took me 3 hours to find what I was looking for. And when I found it, I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit in the November cold and held a manila folder and understood that my father had not only destroyed Frank Derry, he had kept the evidence of how he did it. Inside the folder, a photocopy of the signature card from the account opened in Frank's name. A handwritten note, in Gerald Cole's hand, which I had known since childhood. That read FD Act, NF Branch, March 3. The initials of the bank's North Franklinton branch, which had since closed, and a copy of a wire transfer authorization, also dated March 3, 2002, moving $340,000 from the Cole Derry operating account. The authorization was signed with Frank Derry's name, in Gerald Cole's handwriting. He had kept a copy, because Gerald Cole was meticulous and trusted himself completely, and believed he would never need to answer for this. He had been right for 22 years. He was about to be wrong. I retained an attorney in Columbus, a civil litigator named Patricia Odom, recommended by a colleague, and met with her on December 2, 2023. I brought the folder. I brought Frank Derry. Patricia was quiet for a long time after reviewing the documents. Then she walked us through what she was looking at. Documentary evidence of fraud, forgery, and civil conspiracy. The statute of limitations on most of those claims had expired years ago. Ohio's standard civil fraud (SOL) is 4 years from discovery, and Frank had known what happened since 2002. But there was an exception. Ohio Revised Code 2305.09 includes a discovery rule provision for fraud that the injured party could not reasonably have discovered despite due diligence. Frank had not had the forged signature card. He had not had Gerald's handwritten note. He did not have, until I walked into that storage unit, the wire transfer authorization that connected his partner's hand to the theft. What Patricia believed, and what she was willing to argue, was that the statute did not begin running on the full scope of the fraud until the forged documents surfaced, because Frank could not have discovered the complete mechanism of the fraud without them. It was not a guaranteed case. Patricia was clear about that. But it was a real one. I asked her what a realistic outcome looked like. Financial damages for the value of what was taken, plus interest. Potential punitive damages given the premeditated nature of the forgery. And she paused. Reputational clearing. A court finding in Frank's favor would mean a public record establishing that the Cole Derry fraud was perpetrated by Gerald Cole, not Frank Derry. Frank, sitting next to me, had not said a word through the entire meeting. Frank was quiet through the entire meeting. At the end, one sentence. That last part. That's the one that matters to me. I called my father on December 7th, 2023, Gerald Cole, 67, living in a golf community in Scottsdale, who had been retired for 4 years, and who called me on birthdays and holidays with the comfortable warmth of a man who believed his past was fully behind him. He picked up on the second ring. Nathan. How was Thanksgiving? I told him. I told him that Frank Derry had knocked on my door, that I had invited him in, that Frank had told me the story of Cole Derry Partners, and that I had gone to the storage unit and found the folder. The silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. I counted them. When Gerald spoke again, his voice had changed in a way I had never heard before. The warmth was gone. What was underneath it was something harder and colder and more careful. Nathan, that man is a liar. He stole from us. I've told you, Dad. My voice did not shake. I have the signature card. I have the wire transfer authorization. I have a note in your handwriting with the branch initials and the date. I have all of it. We're not going to have a conversation about what Frank Derry did. We're going to have a conversation about what you did. Another silence, shorter this time. I want you to think very carefully, Gerald said, about what you're doing. I have been. Since November 23rd. I paused. Patricia Odom is filing the civil complaint in January. I thought you should know before it became a matter of public record. I hung up. The civil complaint was filed in Franklin County Court of Common Pleas on January 9, 2024. Nathan Cole and Frank Derry. Plaintiffs versus Gerald Cole, defendant. Fraud, forgery, civil conspiracy. Unjust enrichment. Gerald retained counsel within a week. The case is ongoing as I write this, in the early months of 2024. Patricia has told me these things take time. Depositions, discovery, potential settlement negotiations. Gerald's attorney has already made one settlement approach that Frank declined because it included a confidentiality clause, and Frank will not sign a confidentiality clause. He told Patricia, I waited 22 years for my name to be clean. I'm not signing that away. What I can tell you is what has already happened, regardless of how the case resolves. Frank Derry spent Thanksgiving in my guest room. He spent the next week there too, while Sandra and I figured out what the right next step was. By December, we had helped him secure a room at a transitional housing facility on the east side of Columbus, with a 3-month subsidy that Sandra, who had gone from furious to methodical once she understood what Frank's story actually was, organized with a precision that made me deeply grateful I had married her. Frank is working. Not in development, not yet, but in construction project coordination for a mid-sized contractor in Worthington, who knew Cole Derry's reputation and, once Frank explained the circumstances, gave him a chance. He is 64 years old and starting over, and he is doing it with the same patient. Steady composure he showed on my porch when he was prepared to accept no and walk away. His daughter, a woman named Kelsey, who lives in Cleveland and had lost contact with her father over the worst years, called him in January after he sent her a letter. They are rebuilding something that the fraud destroyed along with everything else. That does not have a court filing number. It cannot be entered into evidence. But it is, in my view, the most important thing that has happened since Thanksgiving. My father has not called me since December 7th, 2023. I have not called him. I do not know yet what our relationship looks like on the other side of a courtroom. I am not certain it survives it. That is a grief I am still sitting with. The specific grief of learning that the story you were given about your own family was written to protect the person who told it, not to protect the truth. What I know is this: I almost didn't open the door. I nearly handed Frank a $10 bill through a 2-inch gap and gone back to my gravy. Sandra was right that it was uncomfortable. She was right that it disrupted our Thanksgiving. What she could not have predicted, what neither of us could, was that the man on our porch was not a stranger who needed dinner. He was the answer to a question I hadn't known I was supposed to ask. I'm a structural engineer. I spend my working days calculating load and stress, figuring out what a structure can bear, where the weaknesses are. What happens when something is built on a foundation that can't hold the weight placed on it? My father built a life on a foundation of what he did to Frank Derry. He built it carefully and lived in it comfortably for 22 years and trusted that the foundation would hold. It held until Thanksgiving. Then a man rang my doorbell and asked for food. And I opened the door. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.